So here we go. So again, thank you for joining me again today. So diving straight into my talk about marine conservation in Singapore. Okay, give me a second. Okay. Like most mid-career academics, I find myself wearing several hats over the years. I am now a senior research fellow, which is also akin to a principal investigator at the Tropical Marine Science Institute within NUS. I'm trained in marine ecology with a highly specialized interest in the giant clams, which I will share more later. Some of the other roles complementing my main job are marine conservationist, science communicator, and woman in STEM, and now a mother in STEM as well. In my talk today, I want to share my journey as a marine conservationist living and working in Singapore, and particularly how I have adapted my role as a scientist in raising marine literacy and awareness in Singapore. I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about my childhood. Growing up in urban Singapore can be both scary and amazing at the same time. Having witnessed the massive changes and developments made to my island nation home to improve our citizens' lives. Despite these changes, my parents always managed to find some untouched wild places around the island for our family outings. So in fact, my closest encounter with the sea was playing along the beaches. My main inspiration to work in an environment-related career is nature itself, enjoying every moment of observing my surroundings and seeing how flora and fauna work together. I'm not that old, I'm about my mid-30s, but my grandparents and a few generations before them were living next to the seas of Singapore, and many of them actually depended on it for their livelihoods. Singapore's coastline was once filled with vibrant seafaring life, as seen in this photograph of a quaint fishing village in the south of Singapore. But gone were those fishing villages. Singapore has undergone massive changes over the last 50 years to cater to the various demands arising from rapid development and population growth. Extensive coastal development has been carried out since the 1960s. You can see from the figure that much of the southern and northeastern coast of the mainland, as well as the southern offshore islands, have been reclaimed, where total land area has increased by more than 20%. Also, known as one of the busiest shipping ports in the world, nearly 80% of our territorial waters are managed as port waters, and the remainder utilized by various sectors, ranging from the military, petrochemical industries, aquaculture, as well as for recreation. With so much going on in our coastal waters, doesn't it make you wonder if any marine life still exists? People have often remarked to me, Singapore waters look so green, dirty, and polluted. Got marine life to study, ah? This is a common perception of many Singaporeans because it can be hard to imagine any life under the sea when all you see are ships across the sea horizon. Just look at my background. It's covered with petrochemical industries on one of the offshore islands here. So can marine life live here? Despite us having lost up to 60% of coral reefs in the early years, Singapore is still home to at least 200 different species of hard corals, the teeny tiny organisms that build reefs. So once a year, when the conditions are right, the full moon, low tides, and warm waters, the corals will use these cues to take part in a mass spawning event. Tiny pink bundles, as you can see in this photo, half the size of a rice grain, are released into the water column. They contain eggs and sperm of the corals, which will float up to the surface, become fertilized, and hopefully produce the next generation of baby corals for our reefs. Globally, we know that coral reefs are important foundation structures that provide food and shelter for many reef animals. Even though only 0.2% of the seafloor is covered by coral reefs, it supports nearly 25% of marine life. Similarly, in Singapore, our reefs may be small, but it is home to many different marine life, such as the colorful reef fishes, sharks, rays, sea turtles, and dolphins. Also not forgetting the spineless creatures, such as the nudibranchs, sea stars, sea anemones, and crabs as well. One of the reef animals, the Neptune's cup sponge, even made a reappearance in our waters after it was declared globally extinct for over 100 years. My colleagues at the Marine Lab are now trying to find out more about this mysterious sponge. So fortunately for us, our surrounding waters isn't quite dead yet, unlike what most people may think. But how do we know that all of this marine life exists in our busy port waters? The marine life enthusiasts and volunteers have been major champions of Singapore's seashores. One of the pioneers that you can see here is Ms. Ria Tan, who manages the Wild Singapore website and one of the most and probably the most comprehensive compendium of marine biodiversity records on wild fact sheets of Singapore. Ria, together with over 20 volunteers, are sentinels guarding Singapore's marine biodiversity. It is because of their passion for the marine life and dedication to head out to the shores during ungodly hours, ungodly hours in the form of 2 to 3 a.m. or even as late as 8 to 9 p.m. And the work has helped researchers to understand what we potentially can discover from our marine waters. In 2008, I had the opportunity to join Ria on one of her field trips, along with my classmate. As a student of science and a nature enthusiast, it was truly eye-opening for me, having to land on the reef in mid-water and learning how to spot marine life on the shores. All this while, I've only ever seen marine creatures in documentaries. That's how mountain tortoise I am, which means that I'm living under a rock to some extent. But this entire experience, this was entirely different. And after spending nearly 10 years with this group of volunteers, their passion really rubs off on me. It made me want to study hard to train as a marine scientist so that I can weave their stories into science. While I joined these field trips as a marine volunteer learning about our local marine life, I was also understudying a professor at the Department of Biological Sciences in NUS, investigating the ecology of giant clams. It was through this undergraduate project that I have found my research muse that has kept me occupied for more than 10 years now. So here's what you need to know about this really cool animal. Giant clams, as its name suggests, are the world's largest living marine bivalves. The largest species can grow up to 1 meter long and weigh over 250 kgs. They are closely related to the family of true cockles, which includes the hard cockles and strawberry cockles, under the family called Cardiidae, which is further categorized into 2 genera, Hippopus and Tridacna. Like the hard corals, giant clams share a relationship with symbiotic microalgae. This allows them to not only filter feed for phytoplankton in the water column, but also obtain food from the photosynthetes produced by these symbionts. These animals are pretty long-lived, possibly up to 100 years old, making them pretty good indicators of coral reef health. Due to their size and colorful bodies, they are conspicuous components of tropical coral reefs. Globally, there are 12 recognized species. Over the last 55 years, this list has exactly doubled this year. The latest species to join the ranks is Tridacna elongatissima. It's a Western Indian Ocean species. Most of the species that you can see here on this slide are Indo-Pacific species, which means that you can find them here in our region, Southeast Asia. Very interestingly, during the course of my research, I found that giant clams have been important fixtures in various social and cultural settings, which spans across many geographic locations. They have been used in different contexts, especially as food and as ornaments. Although not very well understood at first, giant clams were found to serve various ecological roles on coral reef ecosystems, such as food sources for reef animals, shelters for small reef invertebrates as well, and reef building. To some extent, you can kind of think of them as ecosystem engineers, working to recreate or create, modify the environment that they live in. Unfortunately, these iconic animals are becoming more endangered across its distribution. Having reviewed over nearly 1,000 papers, reports, and grey literature, plus informal interviews with numerous of the co-authors that you see on this paper, of which many of them are actually pioneers in the field of studying giant clams since the early 1980s. We reported that nearly 1/4 of the places had one species locally extinct, which means that you can no longer find the species present or in very, very low numbers within a certain location. And unsurprisingly, the larger species are the most endangered ones as well because of their size and their perceived overall value. So what are the factors causing these declines? The major factor is overharvesting to supply their flesh as seafood and their shells for the ornamental trade. In addition, another major threat is global warming itself that also causes these animals to bleach, just like the corals. And that's how I went down the rabbit hole of studying marine ecology of invertebrate species, focusing on the giant clams and their conservation issues. One of my most memorable projects was trying to get them to spawn eggs and sperm so that I can make more baby clams. I spent many hours under the stereo microscopes, watching the larvae swim around, using toothbrush, not my using used toothbrush, to clean the juvenile in my tanks. So I have to add that at times I have to convince myself that what I was doing is on the path to becoming a legitimate marine scientist. And you can probably imagine why so, using toothbrush and just staring at little things or little dots under the microscope all the time. I also use many other field and lab approaches to studying this charismatic megafauna, which also includes roping in citizen scientists, social media, and my family to champion my conservation cause for the giant clams. So just for a quick fun, try spotting my COVID lockdown photo here. And you can see my little helper, or in some cases, my little disruptor with me at work. I'd like to share one of the efforts that I had started many years ago. It is the long-term monitoring of giant clams in Singapore waters, where marine volunteers can send me photos of their giant clam sightings for catalogue. Slowly, we have collectively amassed nearly 10 years worth of sightings data. So here's one individual I'd like to share who's very special to me. She is a she. I'll explain a little bit why. My first wild giant clam in Singapore, who we affectionately named her Mama Jong. So very quickly, giant clams are simultaneous hermaphrodites, which means that they can possess both male and female sexual organs at the same time. But once they hit a certain size, they have the tendency to be females during induced spawning or during spawning. So we followed her throughout the years and even had induced spawning to collect her eggs in 2014. Alas, her journey with us ended in 2018. That happened to also coincide with the global bleaching events. The good news is we have also been able to follow several other clams for at least 5 years now, and we're glad to see them doing okay on our reefs. This long-term following would not have been possible without my friends and volunteers who tirelessly survey these seashores regardless of rain or shine. I can think of no other people who will follow a giant clam for 10 years long. Maybe on social media, but probably not in person. So if you do know someone, please let me know. I think we can chat a long time as well. While I am still a devotee of studying giant clams, I have also been extending my technical expertise across different research areas, such as marine taxonomy and biodiversity, as well as marine plastics pollution. There is still so much that needs to be done and discovered here in Singapore, but there's just not enough time. So in my journey, marine conservation isn't quite what it seems to be or perceived to be in general public view, in my opinion. I didn't start out as a marine conservationist, as I hope you can tell by now. My training is in marine ecology, where I started to integrate different approaches such as molecular genetics, field surveys and sampling, marine law and policy to approach addressing marine conservation issues. Together, they provide stronger impetus towards species conservation or even mitigate other larger environmental issues such as marine plastics. So to some extent, I feel that marine conservation is a construct to bring in different sciences to support on-the-ground activities. I have spoken at length so far on how I have approached marine conservation through the protection of endangered marine species. Let me spotlight some of the good work carried out by the many marine scientists here in Singapore. This is my young scientist take on how marine conservation works in Singapore. The approaches taken so far has been to restore damaged marine ecosystems while trying to reduce human-caused damages to the environment. But more importantly here is how do we best manage these remaining habitats in a highly utilized sea space like ours? So before we look at some of the marine conservation efforts, we need to first know and see what are the threats to Singapore's marine ecosystem. This looks like a long list, and it's possibly even longer. And many of these threats are also common across our region's ocean ecosystems. Clearly, many of these threats are man-made. And at the same time, I remain optimistic that man is also the solution or can think of solutions to solving today's ocean problems. Coral reef research has received the most attention among the other habitats in Singapore. When I was studying, I learned of the works of my professors that had helped shape coral conservation in Singapore. They had studied and tested different methods to find out how best to restore our marine habitats. One such project looked at installing artificial reef modules called reef enhancement units, or in short, REUs, to provide more space for marine life to colonize. But you can see from the two pictures, the project took more than a decade before corals and other life fully established it as their homes. Here's a quick look at the various other approaches, which includes relocating corals from potential sites of development, using corals of opportunity, which refers to little corals that naturally occur as fragments on the reef, or even coral juveniles that have recruited onto loose rubbles, and they will be placed onto coral nurseries. And as well as also optimizing the methods for rearing coral larvae. As for the other marine habitats, there has been growing efforts as well. This includes RUM, which stands for Restoring Ubin Mangroves. It is a community-driven project to restore mangroves in abandoned aquaculture ponds at Pulau Ubin. Team Seagrass is a collaboration project between National Biodiversity Centre at the National Parks Board, which is a local national agency, as well as Seagrass Watch, an international organization, to lead volunteers to monitoring our seagrass meadows around Singapore's seashores. The EMO, which stands for Experimental Marine Ecology Lab, is also where I did my PhD. Is a marine lab in NUS that uses novel experimental approaches to research urban marine systems. I'd like to do a special mention on enhancing biodiversity on tropical seawalls, because coastal defense infrastructure, such as seawalls, are very ubiquitous in Singapore, comprising more than 60% of our country's coastlines. So there lies a huge potential to blow up these artificial structures on a large scale. Another one of the most iconic projects that I can remember is the comprehensive marine biodiversity surveys conducted between 2010 and 2015. And I'm very happy to be at least a part of this as a volunteer, helping with the sampling and the survey as well. This project aims to systematically take stock of Singapore's marine biodiversity with the help of public members, local and international scientists. The study yielded more than 200 new species records, with also more than 50 of them potentially new to science, as well as some interesting observations, such as the parasitic isopod that ate and replaced itself as the fish tongue. I can't quite imagine that happening in a human version, I suppose. Another of our proudest moments for the marine community in Singapore was the announcement of the nation's first marine park in 2014, also known as the Sisters Islands Marine Park. This has led to many other firsts, including our first sea turtle hatchery, located on one of the islands within the marine park. Another visionary effort is the conceptualization of the Singapore Blue Plans. So in conjunction with the International Year of the Reefs, which is celebrated every 10 years, the marine community pitted their heads together to produce the Singapore Blue Plan. This Blue Plan is then presented to the government and agencies every decade, with the latest installment launched in 2018. It consists of recommendations backed with scientific and legislative data on ways to ensuring long-term benefits for the country's marine areas. You can check out this report at this link. Last but definitely not the least, here's giving a shout out to the many citizen scientists and community-led groups who have massively been very helpful in progressing our understanding of the marine environment. It is with their support and on-the-ground efforts that many more people living in Singapore are increasingly aware of our marine spaces. So with the examples shown earlier, I strongly believe that scientific research can help to inform marine conservation. But with any kind of research, it can take quite a long time to produce results, to show our policymakers, or to make a case for conserving our remaining marine habitats. At times, I wonder, will it be a case of too little, too late? Our planet is said to be facing its sixth mass extinction of plants and animals, a crisis driven by us humans. We are already seeing this happening even on our own seashores. Abandoned fishing gear choking up marine life, coral reefs cleared to make way for land expansion, and global warming causing coral bleaching events. Environmental research involving living organisms and systems take time to observe the effects and results. But there is an urgency to do more right now before it's really too late. So what exactly is doing more? So for me, I found the answers or some answers in the form of engaging the public on marine conservation. And that's how I would make sure it won't be a calamity. As scientists, there are many good reasons on why you should engage the public. And here are just some of them. Apart from the fact that our research funding comes from the government and public, sharing our scientific knowledge can be viewed as our social responsibility to inform society. Knowledge itself is a powerful tool that can influence mindsets, and this can also help to build support for science and promote understanding to the of its wider relevance to the society. Engagements can also become a platform to showcase your research work beyond your peers to broader non-scientist audience. And in the process, you can build more visibility and reputation on your credibility. You will be perceived as a reliable source of information where people can and should trust you when it comes to the research that you are working on. And yes, hopefully in the process, be able to get more funding to continue research work. Science can provide the basis for driving conservation, but only if made to be more personable, relatable, and actionable to the wider audience. So you may ask me, how do I do it? So here are my 5 takeaways for scientists and practitioners of science doing public engagement. So firstly, don't be afraid to step up and champion for science. Become ambassadors of science so that you can inspire science to the next generations. You need to become more visible in the process because you love science and support the rigor of scientific inquiry, accountability, and transparency. particularly if or when your research could underpin informing decision-making in society and policies. Lever on the power of World Wide Web to disseminate fun facts about science and your research, such as using some of the social media outlets today. Become storytellers of science. Understanding what your audience responds to is an important skill in helping them embrace science better, and that science can help to better our world. Finally, focus on the science, but also don't forget its social impact. Be relatable. Public masses gain a greater appreciation if the science of things are conveyed to issues that they care most about, such as health and technology. So, when your audience can understand what is going on, then they will start to care. And when they care enough about the issues, that's when they start to take action. You may also tell me, do I need training to communicate my science? My answer is no, not really. Science communication can start right in your home with your family and friends, engaging on their understanding of what you have just told them. I remember feeling like I'm at the top of the world when my dad asked to learn more about giant clams, and we had a conversation about them. For me, I couldn't have asked for better support than from the people closest to me. In kind of close to summarizing my talk at the moment, my experiences so far have been quite life-changing, not really quite, very life-changing for me. I realized that my words carry very great weight because of the knowledge I have acquired as a scientist. So for me, well, having worked with the marine life, where they hide under our murky waters, but because of my work, I had the opportunity to observe their elusive lives underwater. As the saying goes, seeing is believing. If people cannot see underwater for themselves, it is hard to convince them on the worth of protecting our marine life. This is where I feel I can contribute, not just as a scientist, but as a marine volunteer and a nature enthusiast as well. I can bring the seas closer to people by communicating the information that I've learned. But I also like to touch on the fact that it is not like the journey itself, it hasn't been very smooth. Building public awareness on marine conservation took much longer than I had expected. Having said that, being in this for 10 years and some of my mentors having been this in like over the last 2 to 3 decades as well, one of the major challenges I faced was, how do I make this information relatable to the everyday person? The process was a trial and error for me on how to become engaging when talking about scientific facts. I had to relearn many communication skills and be creative in the way I deliver information. There are many times I also wonder to myself if all these communication efforts had any impact at all on my audience. At times, I do feel like an echo chamber, but slowly and surely, I begin to notice my persistence in talking and talking and talking about our marine lives has rubbed off onto people around me. My family, my colleagues, my students, my volunteer friends, bit by bit, everyone started to share what they knew, and we noticed that other people started listening to us as well. This is definitely an ongoing process, and we still have a long way to go. I am optimistic that there is still hope to reverse the tides and protect our remaining marine life. My professor, Chow Lok Meng, had once said, coral reefs here have not given up on hope. Sorry, I think every time when I talk about this quote, it always gets to me. Coral reefs here have not given up on hope, so we should not give up on them. So I still feel that we all can do something, and that starts at home. For me and for us, many of us, it starts here. Sorry. It starts right here in Singapore. And for me, this journey has only begun. After becoming a mother, my newfound source of motivation is my little girl. And I want to do her right by leaving a positive environmental legacy that she can enjoy and be proud of. And so, education on marine conservation also starts right in my own home. With that, I end my presentation, and I'm really very thankful and appreciative for your time listening to my stories and hopefully have not scared most people. I do get a bit emotional for the topic that I talk about very often. I know that we have a lot of time, and I think that's the purpose of leaving a lot of time as well, because I would really like to have conversations and be able to answer some of your questions. So if you have any questions that you can think of, slowly formulate them. Feel free to leave it in the Q&A chat box. So I'll hand my time over to Teresa for a bit to do some housekeeping announcements. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Maylin. Yeah, for the very insightful and passionate talk. It was really very encouraging to hear about your whole decade-long journey. And fortunately, I was part of a whole portion of that.
Yes.
Yeah. So now, before we begin the Q&A session, let us take a look at who will be up next. So as I mentioned, this is the 4th talk in the series. So for the 5th talk, we are excited to have the poster. Sinhan, can we have the poster? Right. So for the 5th talk, we are delighted to have Professor Chu Shu Sin share about his work on Diadem bacteria. So for those who are interested in this talk, please keep a lookout for our presentation, for our invitation for this session. Okay. So for the rest of you, if you have any questions, once again, please feel free to put them in the Q&A chat box and we will take a look at them.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think they are taking some time to type out their questions. So
Yeah.
I do have some that the attendees have already submitted before the talk. So maybe we can do this Q&A session now already. Okay,
Yes,
so
that's right. We can start.
one of the more open-ended question is, how does one become a scientist? Maybe this
Well,
might
I
be
think this
inspiring for all the students who are attending the talk as well. So perhaps you can give some insight.
No, I think you can give some insight as well. I mean, you also being a student of science. That's an interesting question, and I think instead of going straight into the academic perspective of things, of having to do the degree or relevant degree, I think it's about finding a topic or subject matter that you are passionate about, be it math, science, engineering, or even what's the last one? Technology. Yes, yeah. Sorry, I'm going by the STEM, STEM, and in some cases, arts as well. Let's not forget about the social sciences as well. So after having found a certain subject topic, and you ask yourself, once you actually choose a topic that you really are passionate about or very interested about, I think that will take you through to becoming the scientist that you want to be. I think many of our graduates, they don't necessarily go into the path of becoming a scientist. Definitely there are different routes and different ways of seeing how you become a scientist as well. So, but very firstly, I think if you ask me how to become a scientist, I think first is to really discover what is that topic or subject matter that really hits you at the get-go. But yeah, I know. I mean, it's an open question. I like to also hear if Teresa has any thoughts about it as well.
Yeah, I totally agree in terms of having a pet topic, something that you are really interested about. And that's what keeps you going for 1 decade, 2 decades, or even more. Right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so I guess like you also celebrate that certain milestone as well, that as you go along this journey, it's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
Sometimes especially being in conservation, where you see habitats, environments, sort of declining over time, that can sometimes be a bit upsetting as well.
Mhm.
But But I guess there are many positive outlooks or perspectives that you can take with some of these issues, at least for conservation. So I'm seeing a lot of questions coming along. Maybe we
Yes.
should just go.
Sure. So maybe one related to your pet topic first. So I think Suchan is asking, can you explain if giant clams eat the same species of microalgae as the coral polyps, or elaborate on it? Like, what do they eat? What happens
Yeah.
in nature, or
So,
maybe what do you use on them in the lab setting, maybe?
yeah, I think there's definitely much more information from the lab setting, but also because from a supplemental feeding point of view, you want to be able to give algae, microalgae species that grows well in laboratory settings as well. So some of the species that we have used over the time, or even from what I see in literature, are like Isochrysis, Tetrasalmins, and Chitoceras. These are the genera of the species strains. If you're talking about from the wild individual's perspective, it can be even a greater range as well. Solely because diversity of phytoplankton in the water column is much greater as well. I guess, like, as a lead on question, if you're interested to explore, is whether giant clams would specifically filter only certain algae. So there are studies that have for other bivalve species said that they do filter very specifically. They would filter out algae phytoplankton that they don't eat, but only take in certain species. But these studies haven't really quite been done for giant clams, and the ones that have been used in lab has been seen as well taken up by the animals also.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So I'm taking a look at all the questions, and collectively there is like a common strand on. Can you please elaborate on how climate change has sort of have an impact on the coral reef system in the waters in Singapore or in the region?
Right. Yeah. Wow, this is really a very broad topic, but at the same time, I think it's an issue that we're also beginning to come to realization its gravity as well.
Yes.
So for us in the working in the marine environment, the first thing that really hits us when we know of like coral I mean, we use the word coral bleaching very broadly as a descriptive term, but it is true. It is really that the corals bleach. And the reason for corals bleach is because of the same symbiotic microalgae that I talked about that also can be found in giant clams. So these microalgae and the organism, like corals and clams, are also equally sensitive to the changes of temperature. At least in this case, it's usually seawater temperatures becoming warmer. So becoming very sensitive to these micro changes. And what has happened is that the algae leaves the coral. And actually what is left behind is not the coral skeleton, but rather tissues that are mostly transparent, and you can see the skeleton through. So in that scenario, the corals it's almost a 50-50 survival chance. So there's a 50% chance that the corals will be able to recruit some of these algae back into their tissues, or die slowly over time as well. So there are many factors that would affect this recovery period. So one example would be how long is this water warming period, how long does it last, and also the kind of environment that the coral is as well. Does it help to encourage uptake of the necessary plankton, phytoplankton, or is the environment also high flushing so that there's actually good water current, pushing away sediments, at least from Singapore's context as well. In the giant clams, we do see the same thing as well. And that's usually one of the first or the most obvious impact of bleaching events or even climate change on our coral reefs.
Right. So I think that would be perhaps more from the environmental point of view. So can you elaborate? I'm just also taking a look at the broad questions, the strand. Can you also elaborate a bit more about human interventions, say, for example, from the governmental point of view on marine conservation?
I think this is something that you can chime in at some point.
Sure.
I I guess from a governmental point of view, so maybe before we go in that perspective, I think it's a tripartite kind of collaboration or
Right.
partnership. I see that in order for people in important positions to realize what's happening in our environment, I think it's very important for us to be able to engage them either on facts and figures or be able to take them out to the seashores to see what's going on, or to even take them to places where the impact is happening as well. So
Mm-hmm.
as I already said in my presentation earlier, seeing is believing. I think that's one aspect to engaging our policy makers. So much so that we can help to drive some of the conversations and the efforts towards looking at ways that we can either work together as the academic community, as the marine interest group communities, as well as agencies,
Mm-hmm.
especially MPARKs in this case, to mediate. I think there are some examples, although not necessarily marine. For instance, the some of our wildlife act, or one of our wildlife act is called the Wild Animal and Birds Act. It's a very, very old act, 1965. And many of the legislations are very archaic, which I think one of it that always sort of stays in my memory is the fact that you cannot keep exotic pets, which includes gorilla, kangaroo, and I don't know. I mean, these are just some of the example of animals in that archaic act. So recently, because the community really came together and engaged with one of our member of the parliament, and he actually took the bill up to to the government itself, in the parliamentary sitting and hearing, and basically after 3 hearings, it was passed, and our act has been amended to reflect the contemporary issues in the environment as well. But maybe I can sort of get Teresa to share a bit about, maybe from the Singapore Blue Plan's perspective. I do see some of the questions about that as well.
Right. So I think just like what Maylin said, this is like a tripartite thing. Of course, individually we won't be able to do it, but collectively we are quite strong, and it's possible. It's also like what she shared previously, like how we can be the solution to the problem as well. So being able to share and having meaningful conversations, it may not result in the answer overnight, but then together we can work towards something. So at least that's the stand for the blue plan. It's supposed to advise for the next 10 years, and of course there are 6 recommendations in the most recent version of the blue plan, the 2018 one. So please feel free to take a look at it at the document online. So for Meili and I, we are quite uh, inclined to push for the 6th one in no priority. The 6th one is the
Yes.
strand on education. So that's what we do for more scientific communication, scientific literacy, as well as education in the curriculum. Yeah. So I think one of the more common question actually is also what is to you, what is the greatest threat to marine life in Singapore? Or maybe as a whole, what do you think is the greatest threat?
Right. I guess like times have changed, and I think modern day, like in the modern day times, like today, like what would be, if you ask me what would be a major threat, would be, hmm, to some extent, is the competitive utilization of our sea space.
Mm,
So bearing in mind that our country is small, and we are also in the midst of trying to be upscaling, say, food security, through aquaculture, or increasing aquaculture facilities, of which we all know that aquaculture and sea farms would come together. So it's about sort of that balance between a human need versus protecting what's our remaining marine habitats as well. I think that would be a major, one of the major, well, not say threat, but definitely a major challenge, because in most instances, I think we do take a bigger priority over um, the human needs for sure.
Of course.
So I think, yeah, for sure. So I think where I see us coming in is to be informative, but at the same time to step up and be realistic about some of the facts that either we know or we don't know, about the potential impacts of having additional utilization of the sea
Right.
spaces as well. Yeah. So this is my take on what could be a main threat to Singapore's ecosystem today.
I agree because I think being informed will then allow a better decision-making process, right?
Yes, definitely. I definitely agree that we have to move and progress as a nation and be able to sustain some of the important needs, especially with the global pandemic. Food security was a concern, and being able to be self-sufficient to some extent is definitely important for an island nation like ours.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it that we can all work together to ensure that the marine environment is still, um, pristine is not the right word, but rather be able to still maintain the functions of the ecosystems that we have left,
Mm-hmm.
while being able to use the space sustainably. I think that's the word, so that they can coexist better. I know it's a very difficult task, and that's why we want to keep having this conversation with everybody
Right.
that's involved. Mm.
Yeah. So I would like to follow up on that conversation. So Winnie is asking, is like what you say, our country puts a lot of
Mm.
focus on biotech as well as food security. So
Mm.
she's asking, how much is there for governmental backing for conservation research, and how difficult is it to get grants?
Wow, this is like
I don't think
the
it's mutually exclusive though. I think being aware is important as well. So perhaps you can
mm.
give your take on or your experience so far.
Yeah. So when we use the term, what's interesting is that I guess, when we use the term marine conservation to pitch for funding and proposals, I do feel personally that it gives the impression that there is no returns
Mm,
from a very practical point of view. And we can imagine why so as well. Much of the funding that is put and placed on marine conservation looks at protecting species, but people can't quite see the tangible outcomes of doing so. And it's not immediate. Like any
right.
research, as I mentioned, especially with living animals and organisms and systems, we only start to see the effects of having their presence on the reefs after many years. So it is definitely a long battle to convince people that to convince people to some extent to invest in the project. But fortunately for us, we are creative. So we start to also explore whether we can look at it from different short-term projects or short-term um, projects that will actually give faster feedback, which is very difficult for
Mm,
sure. But I think
yes.
with a lot of the more modern approaches and technologies these days, so as much as technologies we say that there's a lot of emphasis, but there are certain technologies such as the molecular tools, as well as certain analytical instruments are able to complement with the work that we do. Just as a very quick example is that, like, when we want to see if a coral is healthy or not, apart from growth, which does take years, are there other ways that we can look at its health, whether it has high lipid content or high carbohydrate content? Does that give us an indication that the coral is growing well within a very short span of time? It's a bit like looking at it from a human nutrition point of view, but looking at coral nutrition point of view or the biochemical composition of corals. These kinds of matrices could potentially become useful tools to tell us whether the corals are doing well or the corals are not doing well at a much faster rate and speed compared to, say, waiting for the coral to grow. No offense to any of the growth and traditionally, we always use growth parameters, but we have to acknowledge and we cannot deny that they do grow very slow. I mean, we're not talking just corals. I'm also talking about clams. As a slight joke, like I always think that like any clams that I grow within this lifetime, they might live longer than me. Honestly, it's not a joke. But that's also pending on the fact that they are in a good, safe environment, which allows them to live long and thrive.
Right. So I'm keeping an eye on the time. We are about 5 minutes to 6. I would like to just pose some questions with regards to marine conservation in terms of public awareness as well as scientific communication. So there have been some questions from the students on how can one begin to volunteer to protect the marine ecosystem. So potentially you can share with us some of the avenues, because you are very you would be very well connected to do that.
I think that's one also. But I guess from so in my presentation, like I listed out, there was a really nice slide. Happy to share that maybe again. I don't know. Oh no, I closed it. Sorry. But basically the slide with a lot of interest groups. And actually, I do get the same question also from young students who tell me that they want to contribute back. They want to do something to be part of the whole movement and activity as well. And I have two options that I have seen young people coming up with. One is you start your own group. Really, I mean, in today's setting, it is very conducive and very encouraging. So there are many forerunners who have already started and done so for many years, and they are, to the best of my knowledge, the marine community people are very, very nice. They are always very willing to help. And, Ria is one example. And between her and I, in 2018, when we were celebrating the International Year of the Reef, we started this Facebook page called Celebrating Singapore Shores. If you're interested, do follow us. We really we showcase Singapore's marine issues, good, bad, and also the different activities that you can take part in as well. So that's one avenue that you can tap on to look at potential groups that you could ask and see if it's something that you're interested in. On the side, I try my best as well to accommodate some interns or requests as well. So far, I'm more focused on science writing and communication. And I'm very fortunate to say that I have two students who are sort of simultaneously helping to write some articles. And in fact, I'm very pleasantly surprised that one of them actually kept in touch with me and actually said that she's been writing the article for a long time, and she just decided to send it to me and ask me if I could, share it on Celebrating Singapore Shores. And I was like, this is great. This is something that, if I can provide the platform to showcase your writing, your illustrations, your videos, I'll be gladly to do so, because I think that's what I would have wanted when I was, starting out as a young activist, championing for the issues. But today, I think the setting is definitely much more conducive. There are more people. I mean, I can say myself as well, and to go into that as well. I might not have caught the whole question, but I think the other is basically having maybe captured a little bit of it in my response, is basically looking at the different groups and then writing to them and ask them like, I'm interested. I would love to help you. And also there's definitely much a greater variety to some extent on the topics that they are passionate about. You can actually target for certain groups that you'll be interested to help out with. So for instance, some of them are more focused on education of younger children, primary school, kindergarten. Some of them are more targeted at scuba divers, such as Hantu Block. And then the education one that I'm talking about is Cicada Tree Eco Place. There are others as well. Our Singapore Reefs, giving a shout out to Sam also, who's here today, who has been one of the co-founders, as well as been looking at the issues of marine debris found underwater. So either being part of the movement and activity as a volunteer diver, or even just being on board helping to do data collection and recording. All these, there are many different aspects that can be done and help. And I think an advice would be to know what your talent is. And that talent can be writing, drawing, or be good at using some of the computer tools today to be able to help in the efforts of communicating science, or even just raising an education, or basically all contributing towards raising public awareness about the issues that you're passionate about.
Right. So on that note, and on her advice, I think the time is up. So I'll officially close this. But if you have more questions, please feel free to stay back for a bit. I think we can take a couple of questions. But just to officially close the session, I would just like to, on behalf of the Faculty of Science, National University of Singapore, thank you all for joining us this evening. It was great to have you here. Please keep safe and have a great evening ahead. Thank you, everyone.